Greetings, Kerbonauts! This is Kerbal Space Program. I'm Bob Fitch, and this is episode number 13 of Project Aries, the alternate reality real solar system series. A quick recap of how we got here. The Kerbals arrived on Earth in the late 1930s. It's the 1950s now, and events have unfolded completely differently from what you learned in school. For example, in real life, Von Braun worked for the Americans after World War II, and his war record was overlooked in order to get him to work on the space program to beat the Soviet Union to the moon. But in this alternate reality, the Soviet Union has already fallen because Stalin died of natural causes just days before the Earth-Union Conference in the Netherlands. The United States didn't need Von Braun because the Earth-Union Space Agency had Korolev, and so Von Braun was convicted of war crimes. There is no space race now, and so the world is taking its time to develop a space program. And all the launches that you're seeing in the background are the result of Kerbal influence. Almost all the major governments of the world are working together to explore the solar system. Technology is advancing much faster than did in real life. The world government has faced some trials, especially after the existence of Kerbals was revealed. The two biggest events following that, as it relates to the space program, were an amendment to the Earth-Union Constitution declaring that a few certain nations would only be half partners in the Earth-Union and would still pursue their own space programs. The second major event was the formation of a very small terrorist group that wants to kill the Kerbals. They don't think we're explorers. They think we're putting weapons into space and that we want to dominate everybody. They recently stole a World War II submarine and moved it within miles of Brazil to stop our launch site from receiving supplies. The sub was eventually disabled and some of the terrorists were captured, but the leader is still out there somewhere, and no one knows who it is. So over a few episodes, we've launched and docked this Aries space station in low Earth orbit, and EVA Construction has created half of the truss. Today, Katarina will construct the rest of the truss, but first, we need to move the first solar truss into its final position, and launch the second solar truss. Obviously, we begin by undocking it from the mother station and backing it off gently. Our target is going to be this far left side docking port that sticks out from the larger truss that's still on there. We rotate the solar truss. It has its own autonomous computer, RCS. We had that all built in there specifically for this purpose. Originally, we used that to dock, and now we're using it to position to its final location and redock. It takes several minutes to slowly glide into the position it's supposed to be, but eventually it gets there, docks itself up, and then we can start working on the next solar truss that looks just like this one, but isn't up here yet. It's still down on the surface, and so that one needs to be launched. However, we aren't going to spend too long looking at that. You've seen a launch like that before. Let's just get right up here and see the station again shortly after docking the second bit, where we can open up those solar panels and the ammonia-cooled radiators that'll keep it all chilled. Gotta be chill. And finally, Katarina will go out on her EVA to finish construction of the major truss pieces. That will use up everything that was left in the red containers and the extra truss bit that stuck out that the red containers were attached to, and so you're not going to see those anymore. They've been consumed in order to make the larger truss. Alright folks, I have news. Many of you have been wondering where I've been and where my videos went for so long. I took a break at the release of KSP version 1.2, and what you just heard me saying about the truss and the station construction a moment ago was actually recorded at least 2 months ago for me. So this attempted launch we're watching now, I don't even remember what it was because I put the game down and didn't record any audio for this part, what this launch was doing, until now. I remember that I was having camera troubles during the launch. I remember that the camera was shaking unnaturally, but it got better. And then I remember thinking that the launch was getting a little dull, so I turned the recording of the video off. And right then is when it all went to hell. So I turned the camera back on, but geez, I just wish I could even remember what I had inside that fairing at the time. Here you can see my rocket bits on their way back down after the unplanned rapid disassembly of the launcher. It looks so cool that I had to record it for a bit. Then I went up to the space station and tested the new rotators on the solar panels. I have the playback speed going at about 10 times normal so that you can see it. Okay, so regarding the KSP version, 1.2.1 of the game does not have real solar system support yet, and this was a real solar system series. I was planning to fill the time with remastered Project Gateway episodes, but those were clearly not as popular as compared to my other videos, and so I stopped making them. Since Real Solar System is not ready, and Gateway remasters won't be happening, that left nothing to publish. Until now. Now, I have a new idea.
Good afternoon, Joseph. Alright, Krantz, what's this special meeting about? I have to admit, you have me worried with all the secrecy.
I wanted to tell you in person. I'm taking over as project administrator and putting you in charge of a task force to find out why we can't establish communications with Earth. I know you may think of this as a demotion, but we need you to focus all your attention on this problem and not be weighed down by administrative duties.
I see.
This is no reflection on your work so far. We just want you to be able to focus.
Very well. I'll get started right away. We're at 30%. Everyone report your status. Something's happening. 35%. Mechanical. Copy that. 35%. Mechanical. We're good. 40%. I'm still going. We're go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engage the trans-Earth wormhole device now. Something's wrong.
Check the main power couplers.
We're getting errors. No response. They're offline.
Divert to secondary systems.
Tachyon showing wild green. They're overloaded.
Can you shut them down?
They can't be shut down now.
The chlorine time.
Trying. Injectors are offline. Maybe damage.
Keep trying.
What's that? Secondary core discharge. This is our last chance to eject before the primary discharge.
All the Kerbals lost consciousness as the core was ejected, and it was too late. Something had happened, and they had no idea what. When they awoke one by one, they groggily looked out the windows and saw an unfamiliar base. There were things here and there that were familiar, but for the most part, everything was totally alien to them. It was an extremely strange dichotomy where even though things were not right, something seemed quite familiar about all of it too, as if all of this had happened before and all of it was happening again. The first order of business was to get outside and explore what had happened to the base. They donned hazmat suits in case there were contagions out there, and then they set about touring the base in a vehicle that they had found outside. As before, the base was both familiar and alien at the same time, and very strangely, it was entirely deserted except for a limited crew. They searched the stars as the sun set on their first day in this strange new place. They trained telescopes at the moon as it rose, but it lacked the familiar appearance of the moon they expected to see. They searched the skies for Minmus, and again, the moon they found in its place was not what they had expected. The stars were all wrong as well, and after a short discussion, it was decided that they could not be in Kerbin anymore, at least not the Kerbin they knew. Joseph explained that there was only one possibility, that they had slipped through into another universe. He attempted to reverse the procedure to send them all home, but their experiment failed. Not only were they cut off from Earth, but now they were cut off from Kerbin as well. They found an airplane in a hangar on the base and charged its battery enough to get it started. They took it up to get an aerial view of the base and the surrounding land. So here's what's up. I have a new 1.2.1 install of KSP with lots of mods, including an alternate planet pack called Galileo. The pack is so cool that more than one YouTuber is using it for a Kerbal series right now, but my version is another slip into the world of alternate dimensions. RSS had not been ready for KSP 1.2 for quite a while, and so I hadn't been playing anything, and even though it's technically available now, this story arc of mine had already taken shape in my mind, and now I want to play it out. Making my RSS videos had become a huge time sink because everything takes 3 times longer to launch when it's real, and because I was customizing everything about the install, including making my own part files. In this new story arc, I'm going to play in the Galileo system for a little while as communications with Earth have been lost, and now we're even cut off from Kerbin. The mods I'll use will be installed and then untouched, unlike what I was doing with RSS, where every part, every resource, everything was being retouched and rebalanced. So what that means is technically you could replicate what I'm doing this time, and my craft files would technically be shareable if you had the same mods installed that I had. So what I'm doing as a player is I'm pretending that I don't know more about this world than the Kerbals do. I have no idea what the radius of the planet is yet that I'm on right now. I don't know its mass or what its atmosphere is like. I don't know what other planets there are in this solar system. I don't know how far away my 2 initial moons are yet, or how massive they are. I don't know if they rotate, or how long days are on this world, or how long a year is, and so on. What I'm going to do is carry out experiments to determine all the characteristics I'll need to know, like mass and distance and radius of all the celestial bodies. I'll go exploring, and I'll use my own math skills to determine things like delta V needed to reach other planets and moons, and what it will be like to land on them and lift off and come home, and where we'll need life support. Meanwhile, we'll explore a new storyline about trying to get home to Kerbin so that we can resume our attempts to contact Earth again. The first flight on this new world showed we're on a tiny island. Now we'll try launching a satellite that can scan the planet to learn about its geography and weather patterns. So, step 1 is we need to know the delta V it'll take to get a satellite into orbit. For that, I need to know the mass of the planet, the radius where the satellite should orbit, some atmosphere data like air pressure, and so on. But Bob, how can we figure out these things, you might ask? Well, I'm glad you asked. Here's how we're going to do it. For starters, I've made this sounding rocket that has all the basic science instruments in a compartment on the top. I turned them on one by one so that I can take surface readings, and then later we can take readings in space to compare. But that isn't enough. We need to figure out a bunch of things like gravity. For gravity, if we have an object on the surface, it's being pulled down with a force. That force is the mass of the object times g, the gravity, the acceleration of gravity at the surface. And we can use a 1 kilogram mass on the end of a pendulum. Gravity will affect the rate of the swinging, so we can count the oscillations over a time period, and therefore the effect of gravity on that 1 kilogram mass, which gets us the value of g. Now, if the Kerbals do that, then they should get a value similar to what the accelerometer science part would show when it's just sitting out here on the launch pad, which I saw to be 9.81 meters per second when I measured it, and so that's apparently similar to the real Kerbin. We'll pretend that our Kerbals did the pendulum experiment and then got that value. Next up, we know that the force equation for the planet to any object on the planet is F equals g, the gravitational constant, times the mass of the planet, times the mass of the object, all divided by the radius squared from the center of the planet. And since the force is mg, we just had that a moment ago, we can put that on the left of that equation. And when we cancel all of these out like so, and do a little reordering of the equation, we get this. So now for the mass of the planet, we just need to know the radius and the gravitational constant g. Well, we can use something like the Cavendish experiment to calculate g and make sure it's the same in this universe as it was in our own universe. I talked about the Cavendish experiment in a Project Alexandria episode, if I recall correctly. It uses strings and lead balls to measure the torsion forces to get the big G. Anyway, let's pretend that we do that experiment and find that big G has not changed. It's the same as back home. So now we need the radius, and for the radius of the planet, we'll just watch the sun set, and then run as fast as we can to the top of the VAB to watch the sun set again, and then go back down and wait for a second sunset the next day. The time between the two sunsets tells us the length of a day, which comes out to be about 6 hours when we measure it. The time between the sea level sunset and the VAB sunset gives us two measurements that we can use with the length of the whole day to calculate the radius of the planet based on how fast it rotated and the sun went down the second time. I'll save you that very complex math and say that we figure out that the radius is 600 kilometers, just like on real Kerbin. If we go back to the mass formula, we already have that little g is 9.81 meters per second, and we got the radius of 600 kilometers just now, and we have big G from the Cavendish experiment. So we have everything. Now we just need a calculator to see that the planet's mass is 5.29 times 10 to the 22 kilograms. Oh, by the way, we need to stop calling it the planet. One of the scientists doing all these calculations for us is named Gail Kerman, and so everyone has started naming the planet after her, and thus from now on, I'll call this planet Gail 2. Now that our sounding rocket is getting higher, we can take a look at this pressure meter again and see that as we get higher, the pressure is dropping and dropping, and when it eventually goes to zero and we see that we are in a vacuum, we'll know then what the atmosphere height is. Also, previously, when we were on the ground and we measured the pressure, we saw that it was a little over 100 kilopascals, and that's the same as on real Kerbin. So far, even though the landmass around our launch center seems very different, all the parameters seem very much like Kerbin. Maybe we're actually still on Kerbin, but in a different location, and the only way we're going to know that for sure is to launch a satellite that will go up and scan the planet. Now, if it is Kerbin, earlier, the readings with the moon and Minmus being different like they were, that would be an awful strange thing to try to figure out, but we're guessing we're not there, given the planets, the moons are different, the stars look different, the planets in the sky, the sun itself. We think it's not Kerbin, so we're going to keep going like Gale. So to prove it, we're about to try launching a scanning satellite that will image the surface and send back the entire planet's topology in a couple of days, as it passes overhead later. For all my flights on Gale, I will be showing you everything I launch and every bad thing that happens. We'll start off with some instability as we get going faster here with this first one, and I clearly used fins on the bottom that were not strong enough. I abort that flight and I go back to the VAB for some larger fins on the bottom to give the early seconds more stability. This is a simple 2.5 meter rocket with a simple satellite for now. I have been getting all my mods installed, and most were working, but I'm still continuing to install stuff as I go along. For example, I have Infernal Robotics, but I have not tested it yet, and so I didn't use it for this satellite. I had the clouds working, and then they stopped working, so for a few flights you're only going to see scatterer, but no clouds. I did eventually get clouds reworking again. It turned out to be a mod conflict, and it just got better by itself after reinstalling some mods, though I don't know exactly which one it was, because I did a few at the same time. Anyway, one thing you will see is working, and was one of the first mods I got installed, my lights. There are extra lights around the launch pad, and lots of lights on the rocket and the satellite, because you gotta have more lights. I of course have Kerbal Attachment System and Kerbal Inventory System installed, and I'll get to testing those soon too. And another big thing I've got installed and plan to test out is the Umbra Space Industries mod for colonization and stuff. I'm using its life support system and all the resource collecting and processing that comes with that mod, or all that collection of them. You may remember I was going to use that in my real solar system install too, but so far I had not gotten around to it. We were barely getting the Aries space station into orbit, and we're just getting into the life support for it when I took my break from the series for a little while. Well, there goes the third attempt. The second one had apparently not gone high enough before decoupling because the aerodynamics flipped it over after the center of mass changed. So here we're going again, but there was something else I had noticed before, something odd about the engine. My thrust should be higher than it is. This time around I'm going to pay a lot more attention to it. When I look at the force meter, I see 1G, barely 1G. When I look at the mass of the rocket and the thrust of the engine, even accounting for the lower thrust while still in atmosphere, I see it should be much higher. I modify my MechJeb flight computer to give me more stats to try and figure it out, and I also pull up the debugging console to look for errors, but I don't see anything in either location. It might have something to do with the engine. This is an engine from the cryogenic engines pack. Maybe it's something to do with that. I don't know. I'll have to look into it further. Since I feel like I should be higher than this to prevent flipping after decoupling, I decided to let it coast more this time beforehand, but it wasn't enough. It still flipped. However, we have gone high enough that maybe I'll be able to recover it, and so I give that a try. I decouple the interstage and then just give it a tiny bit of gas in order to let that slip off, and just enough that we can use the gimbal to flip the rocket over and point it in the correct direction. It gets going the way that I want it quick enough, so I figure all is well. What I can do now is drop the fairing in the hope that since we seem to be having some troubles, I might need the extra mass dumped, and so getting rid of the fairing, even though we're still a little bit lower in the atmosphere, we may have enough delta V in order to still make it to orbit. I was thinking that I would be high enough that the aerodynamics wouldn't change much, but I was wrong, and so we still have some troubles. At this point it becomes a battle to maintain altitude while also trying to make forward progress. So I keep jiggling it around, pointing it straight up, then forward again. It keeps wanting to go in the wrong direction, but eventually, with enough fighting it, we get it high enough and going fast enough that I figure I might be able to make it here, and we stick with it. After gaining another 10 kilometers of altitude or so, finally we can get it pointing in the correct direction. And at this point, it's pretty easy. It's just a matter of flying it straight on that velocity vector, going prograde until it runs out of fuel and we can decouple that lower stage, at which point we will look into opening up our extendable solar panels and the scanning system. Use our RCS to push us away from the lower stage a little bit. Go to open those extendable solar panels though, and guess what? They're gone. Oh man, they must have broken off in the process of having the fairing go away as dirtily as it did. In fact, if you look on the back of the satellite, you can see one piece of the broken solar panels has gotten itself wedged in behind a battery. Hopefully the little static solar panels along the outside will be able to give us enough power here and there in order to live long enough to scan some of the surface and send back some data. Fortunately, the satellite itself had at least 1,000 delta V on it, plus I can activate the RCS to give us the extra boost there, as well as dropping some of that less efficient monomass. This should be more than enough to get us into at least a 100-kilometer orbit, and from up there I should be able to scan the surface fairly easily. I haven't played in this stock sort of scale for so long that I have forgotten some details, like how high up you need to be for certain warp speeds. So later when I try to go into warp and I find that I can't do it as fast as I want to unless I'm at least 150 kilometers, well, that just reminds me that next time when I do a launch, I'm going to take it up to 150 rather than this 100. But it still does warp, and it lasts long enough with the scanning in order to get a decent representation of what the surface looks like. I have persistent rotation installed, and I tried to activate it to point at the ground just for aesthetic reasons, to make it seem more reasonable that it's scanning the surface. But for some reason, persistent rotation wasn't maintaining the pointing it down there at the ground like I wanted it to. But it still works. When that data comes back down to Joseph and the Kerbals, we review it and we come to the conclusion that it is definitely not Kerbin. This is someplace else. As we said, we're going to call it Gale after the scientist who has been doing all of that extra research for us. Very similar to how America became known as America because there was a guy making maps. In the 1500s, Amerigo Vespucci, an Italian explorer, had the idea that maybe what Columbus hadn't found was some part of Asia, but instead a whole new continent, and so he named it America, which is a Latinized version of Amerigo, his name. Okay, next week we'll see what's up with this launch. It has a few problems that need to be figured out. Oh, the mod that was making my clouds fail was Mala's Quick Start, and I needed to remove it entirely to get the clouds back. But at least I figured out what that problem was. There will surely be many more problems to solve in the near future. Before I go, a special thanks to Noctis Lux and Castile7 for the craft files for the plane and the car that I used. And until next time, I will see you later, Kerbinauts.